So, as I have walked around the convention hall for the last 2 or 3 hours, many of you have stopped me and said, are you going to stick it to them? Are you going to ask them the hard questions? Come on, give it to them. So I said to these people who are less than charitable, what is it you want me to ask? And then there was silence. So during the course of the next 45 minutes or so, I shall do my best to ask the relevant questions. And if I fail, then I shall invite you, of course, to make up for my deficiencies. We have Geoffrey at the front there, who will immediately leap like a scalded cat if we trespass into areas of compliance that we should not. But our panel today has a variety of serious issues to discuss. We have Chunpong Go, Mr. Go from Singapore, who is with us. We're going to be asking you about how you're integrating your airlines, and will it be a success? Carsten Spohr from Lufthansa Group. We'll want to know what else you might buy. And have you got the checkbook out? Christine Aumier-Widner is with us. Since she's resigned as the CEO, you are the panelist who can speak freest. Are you going to speak freely?
Well, depends the question.
And we have the masochist, Robin Hayes, who has decided to join the transatlantic market, and we will be finding out how JetBlue will perform there. Good to have you.
Thank you.
We start with the serious issue, the more serious issue, of course, of Boeing and the MAX planes. Mr. Go, let's start with you, because Silkair has them on order. What is it you now wish to hear that will allow you the confidence to continue with your order and in the plane? What do you now need to know?
So just for context, Silkair has 6 planes on the ground, 6 MAXes on the ground, and we have 31 outstanding order on top of the 6. I think the MAX issue is well reported, and the requirement, obviously, is first to ensure that the regulators are going to allow the MAX to resume operations. For us, in Singapore, for me in particular, for SIA in particular, we need more than that. So in the case of, let's say, bigger countries, the US, Canada, etc., you can actually operate the MAX on domestic routes. So as soon as the regulator in that particular country allows it, they can operate. But for Singapore Airlines, I suppose I don't have that luxury. Everything I operate is international. What that means is that beyond just having the approval of the authority in Singapore, I would need approval from countries that we intend to operate the MAX to, and that adds another dimension of complexity. Of course, beyond that, we'll need the pilots community to be able to accept the solution, and we need the public confidence to come back.
We'll dissect out that, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about it, but I do think that the MAX issue is the biggest single issue facing the industry.
Therefore, you should not be asking me only of the question.
No, I won't. I won't, but you're the one who has them at the moment.
Well, everyone is an industry leader here.
Yeah, don't worry. They'll all get their fair share.
And of course, you can always direct to audience who have lots of MAXes.
You're doing a very good job of deflecting, but we shall come back to you. This issue of the regulator is what I want to talk about. Carsten, we could end up with a situation where one regulator approves the MAX, say the FAA, but the European regulators, the EASA, take longer and don't. How worried are you about this balkanization of regulation?
Oh, I'm worried in various ways. First of all, I do indeed believe this is what we are facing. So I would also think that probably we see the MAX flying domestic US first before we see it flying somewhere else. But secondly, this is a global industry and it needs global trust. So how can, we have global passengers. So difficult to explain to our passengers that an airplane is safe in some part of the world and supposedly not safe somewhere else. And last but not least, I think those people who are involved a little closer do know it's impossible nowadays for regulators to certify these modern aircraft without buy-in from the manufacturers, which, as we all know, is under scrutiny discussion in the US. So assuming that all regulators around the world have enough inside knowledge of these modern aircraft to do their own judgment might be politically correct and by some people admired, but it's absolutely impossible to execute. So I think even the FAA will need Boeing engineers eventually to decide on the MAX. How are all the other regulators going to do that without the similar buy-in? So I'm worried about that process, which might be kicked off from the MAX incident.
The industry has never faced anything quite like this before, that I can recall. Even if you look back to 787s, if you go back to DC-10s, there's nobody here who remembers, of course, back to the Comet and before, but in terms of a modern airliner, we've never faced this before. Christine, would it be very damaging to the industry and to trust if, as Carsten says, one regulator says it's safe to fly domestically, but another says it's not, or they're still reviewing?
Yeah, I think that, as was mentioned today, our industry is global. I think that nobody will understand how it could be safe in one part of the world and not safe in another. And the best thing that could be in place, but it's even difficult to see with the current infrastructure, is how it will happen the first day. So yes, it will be difficult to restore the trust by having a series of events that will not be coordinated.
This trust question is pretty serious. I mean, again, I can't recall a time quite like this where there is a fundamental issue concerning a particular model of aircraft that is rapidly moving into many airlines' fleets. You don't have any, but obviously you're concerned, obviously, when trust in terms of aviation is involved.
Yeah, I suppose to answer the question a little bit of a different way, I think the biggest concern I have around this is the industry. I mean, clearly what has happened with those two accidents is awful, and it's led to a lot of scrutiny, and rightly so. But if you take a step back and look at the huge advances that have been made over the last few decades in aviation safety, that has happened because of a very deliberate strategy of regulators, manufacturers, and operators all working together. And so my biggest concern around the trust question is that it's an issue bigger than the MAX. People start to question the whole regulatory framework that I think has been largely successful over the last 20, 30 years in promoting a more a safer industry.
If they do start questioning, Carsten, as Robin says, it's entirely possible, what do you do?
No, I think it's important to always repeat the message as Robin just did. This industry has an incredible record of safety, not just based on numbers, but also the culture we have put in. Absolute honesty and transparency when something happens. The industry wants to learn from accidents, has learned from accidents, and has now arrived, as we learned from Alexander today, at 1 to 5 million flights safety record. So I think it's always our job, as also we had to do a few years back when we lost an aircraft, to continuously tell the public that story and to build the trust and maintain the trust of the public.
Sure. You said the problem will become for Silk in Singapore that you don't have the domestic routes, obviously, in that sense. What would you do, and I won't hold you to an answer here, but what would you do if one regulator approves, another doesn't, within your sphere of areas where you would use the plane? Would you hold it on the ground until all, or would you start introducing where you can?
So you never just order the planes to operate to one destination, at least from Singapore Airlines perspective. So we do need to be able to gainfully deploy the plane in order for us to actually deploy and actually operate the plane. So therefore, we will need, at least for the regulators that we intend to operate the planes to approve the MAX for operations. I do not want to speculate how long that will take because I really do not know. It all depends on the regulator's own assessment. But I would say that at this point in time, all the regulators, regardless of where they are from, should be working together in arriving at a solution that is safe for the industry, safe for everyone who is traveling.
Except, as Carsten says, it's highly likely that they won't. It's highly likely that they won't, whether on political grounds or safety grounds in some parts of the world. What do you do then?
Richard, your time is up for other topics.
Thank you, Carsten. Precisely the point.
Maybe. I'll take this answer and then we'll grill you on competition.
Like I say, you know, for us, we have to depend on, it's like what Carsten said, it's likely that if it does start operating, is possibly and most likely to be domestic USA. Right. There could be variations of that because a few other regulators could come along with the FAA. And the operators within that country would then choose to operate within USA and so forth. That's fine. Like I say, for our case, it would have to be at least a minimum viable set of countries that would allow the MAX to operate. Then we'll look at it.
We'll move to competition. Individually, I've spoken to you, or your people, and each of you have talked about the highly competitive environment that you're now facing. The issue is this competitive environment different, Carsten?
Well, for us, there's a very different picture, long range, whether it's the European landscape. In Europe, we have huge overcapacity, especially in the first quarter, very irrational market behavior, tickets for less than $10 or euros. So that is, of course, not a healthy environment and will not be there long. So eventually, the healthy airlines will survive this, and the unhealthy airlines will leave the market, which is, by the way, also consolidation. Consolidation is not only one airline buying another, consolidation is also one airline surviving and the other is not. So I think we'll be seeing more of that in Europe for sure.
You were saying in Asia that you're facing similar issues.
Well, I would say that, as particularly in Southeast Asia, we do have structural changes that have taken place in the last decade or two that would be here to stay. Two in particular I will point out. One is the rapid growth of the LCC markets. Today, the LCC accounts for 55% penetration of the Southeast Asian market. The good thing, I suppose, for SIA, the good thing is that we are actually participating in that growth through Scoot, which is a portfolio strategy that we have adopted with deliberate establishment of LCC within the portfolio to exploit that growth.
But are you seeing the irresponsible competition in the region?
There will be people adding capacity for various reasons. And that's the reason why sometimes yields can be quite low. But I believe that over time, there will be a need for people to pay attention to return.
Robin, in the US, it's brutal, the market at the moment. Are you seeing irresponsible competition?
Well, actually, I'm not sure I would agree with that assessment. I mean, I think we've had the opposite in the US to what Carsten described in Europe, where we now have 4 large airlines with over 80% market share. And then you have a number of airlines, JetBlue, Alaska, a number of low-cost carriers, with the remaining 20%. And so you've had a positive effect where you see low-cost carriers come into the markets, but where you've seen legacy airlines compete with each other, you've not seen the benefit of that in lower fares. And so I think the US actually has got to a point where in many places it's not that competitive anymore.
Right, so yours is one of access. Your issue is one of access, of getting into the new markets, getting the slots, getting the infrastructure, and being able to get a decent run at it.
Correct. Largely, that's true. I mean, in markets where there exist carriers in the US like JetBlue that will have a positive effect on keeping fares low, where we can get access, and where access is there, you've got evidence of that. Where access isn't there, you start to see higher fares.
What can you do about that, other than beat down the door?
Well, I think part of it is linked to making sure there's the right investment in infrastructure. Part of it is making sure the air traffic control system can cope with the growth. And part of it is making sure that airports are following the competition plans that they filed with FAA and DOT. And that hasn't always been the case.
File the plan and put it away.
Yeah, I mean, yes, yeah, that's largely what's happened. And it didn't matter for a long time because there was access, but that's changing.
Christine, were you the victim of what Carsten's talking about?
I think that a difficult story of Flybe has multiple reasons, but one is competition.
Well, you couldn't compete.
Well, with the type of aircraft we have and the type of business model, our core business is domestic routes, and most of the routes we don't compete with any airline at all, and the market, in fact, created a monopoly on some route to leave some airlines flying, on their own, meaning that we have most of the domestic routes in the UK now that are flown by Flybe only, and Scotland is flown by Scottish Airlines. So it's the market itself moved to a non-compete market.
Right, but it's not often we have on the CEO panel a CEO who has just sold the airline to somebody else and has then resigned. So it is worth just exploring that.
But you asked me the question about competition. You didn't ask me why.
No, but what led to it?
Well, in our situation, it was a perfect storm linked to the Brexit was, and it's not, a story that is so easy, but pound weakness because of Brexit. Most of our costs are in pounds, and most of our revenue are in pounds. Our costs are in dollars. Even if you have a good hedging policy, at some point it will hit you. Then you had also a consumer demand. Brexit had an impact in the UK on the consumer demand. Competition was part of the reason. And then you have a fuel cost when we start to have a storm. So it was more on the cost side combined with consumer demand that was a perfect storm for us.
Carsten, do you expect to see more Flybes?
Oh, very much so. I think maybe the optimum competitive environment is somewhere between what Robin is complaining about in the US and what I'm complaining about in Europe. Too many players, obviously, where we are at. And of course, if consolidation hits too high a level, you might see the concerns Robin was pointing at. But we just had a competitor announce its numbers last week. He announced yields of 40 euros, cost of 100 euros, which is a loss of 60 euros per passenger, owned by an Irish friend of mine. So these airlines, of course, are not sustainable, even if there's a strong balance sheet on the owner's side. And that is not only hurting others. I'm not complaining about competition, don't get me wrong. We're having the best years ever in the history of the company. But that kind of ticketing below 10 euros is hurting responsibility, it's trust of the public, of politicians, it's congesting the air traffic control system. So it has all kinds of downsides beyond just the fact that somebody has to cope with it in a competitive way.
But you can see that from the consumer's point of view in the short term, your argument sounds like a legacy protectionist, whereas the upstart from Ireland is coming in with cheap tickets.
No, that's why I try to be publicly very broad in my argumentation. I keep telling people, again, it's economical irresponsible, but that has to be decided by those who offer those tickets. It's environmentally irresponsible, because we basically shouldn't be taking advantage of the environment for that little money. And again, it's, at least in Europe, like Australia, where the environmental discussion is just starting to be huge, and I think we've just seen the beginning of it, it's those examples which of course work wonderful in public to say that we as an industry are irresponsible. And I don't think we are at all. I think we are a very responsible industry, making this world a smaller place, a better place, and in all modesty, looking at where the world is heading, we also make this world a more peaceful place by allowing people to interact, to be exchanged, crossing continents. And all that, I think, is being lost a little bit in the public debate because we are criticized for some of the irresponsible things some of us are doing.
Right, we'll come to the environment because I do want to focus on that in a moment, if we may. But I want to just finish on this competition issue.
So actually, I thought that you provided the answer to that question yourself, which is when you say that at least in the short term. And precisely, if there is going to be competition that is not sustainable, ultimately it's going to hurt the industry. Ultimately, some airlines are going to go out of business, it's going to collapse, and plus the airlines who are in the business not unable to reinvent itself or reinvest in the business and bring a better service, better product, better efficiency for the industry and for the country.
But there's nothing you can do about it, really, is there? I mean, isn't that the problem? You have to just play it out because there's no economic vehicle through which you can deal with that.
So my own view is that there may be this phase that people have to go through, but ultimately, the good sense will prevail, and they will arrive at a situation whereby there is some balance in demand and supply, and the industry itself will then go on.
We could close down all leasing companies. That would take care of it quickly.
I think
Some
that
of the room, I think.
maybe because there is also, because this industry is so complex and so under pressure with controllable and non-controllable even, the risk is to have a massive consolidation, and it's what we see everywhere. You know, in the UK, Fly BMI just collapsed. It was Monarch, and the risk is to have a massive consolidation without any more this independent and a little bit challenging carrier that could bring a little bit more diversity. That's a risk.
As you watched all the other majors in the US eat each other up, Delta Northwest, United Continental American, US, and all, did you get worried? Did you sort of feel this environment is changing? It is changing faster than our model might be able to adapt to, and we could be in trouble.
I think, yes. I mean, look, to begin with, it was necessary. I mean, there were so many carriers in the US. It had been the gold rush since deregulation, and there had to be a consolidation for the industry even to survive. But what happens towards, and that's how it starts. The problem is, by the end of it, the argument changes. The argument is no longer, you need to let this merger happen or we're going to go out of business. The argument becomes, you've got to get this merger happen or we're not as big as that airline over there. And I think
that's inevitable. Once the process begins, surely what starts as an economic necessity ends up as an economic desirable.
But I think and I think again after 9/11 there was still plenty of access. So JetBlue was formed first flight back in 2000, and so we were formed at a time there was access to go into these markets. That's become very difficult for the last few years. So when you get an environment where you've had a lot of consolidation and you have a number of airports that you can't get access to, that is not a pro-competitive outcome for flyers. And that's where you start to see fares go up very quickly.
On the environment, Carsten, you said if you look at places like Australia, this is now becoming a much bigger issue. It is slowly working its way up the agenda in Europe. Living in New York, Robin, I wouldn't say the flying public is particularly exercised yet in the United States on the environment.
What do you mean by the environment?
It doesn't seem to be a burning issue that people are talking about.
No, and also New York is one of the markets where you still have a lot of different airlines that operate.
Right, but on the environment, how is the industry making its case?
Well, I think the industry is doing so many things, especially compared to other industries. Like we have CORSIA. There's not many global industries at all which have a global scheme. In Europe, airlines are taking part in the emission trading system as the only sector of transport. We are showing significant improvements on technology, reducing, as we all know, fuel burn per passenger. But all that, of course, in numbers is eaten up by our growth. So I think even the factual argument, we're doing all these things, by our, well, let's say, criticism, the people who are opposing our position, it's easy to say, well, it's all not enough because the growth is eating it all up. There is an argument there. So I think the question of how fast will we grow in the future, I have my doubts we'll maintain the growth path of the past, with exceptions like China and India, but around the world. And I think we have to be prepared for doing even more. But it's not always the airlines. I mean, air traffic management in many parts of the world has not really improved the last 20 years. They're still flying detours. All these things on the ground, I mean, the way airports load aircraft, unload aircraft, it hasn't changed since I started 30 years ago. So I think we need to be careful that it's not all loaded on the airlines. It's an industry issue. It has to be solved by better integration within the industry.
Right, but Mr. Goh, the industry is doing a pretty, this is me now, the industry is doing a pretty awful job at getting over the message that it is actually doing something. I mean, I'll put it even more bluntly. You are losing in the court of public opinion on the question of the environment.
I think you're right, and there is acknowledgement, even at the recent IATA Board of Governors meeting, that was a huge topic, because like what Carsten have said, the industry have indeed done a lot. It's just that the message is not quite out in the public, and we should do a better job communicating. But even more important, this is a very, very difficult question. There's no easy solution. And even more important is for us to focus the industry together to actually look for solutions that would be that would give us a better outcome in terms of managing this impact on the environment. And that requires all of us to work together and to be able to have schemes that could be measured and deliver a real tangible outcome.
But I'll give you an example. Well, let's ask first of all, how many people who came here ticked the box for carbon offsetting of their ticket? Doesn't that really say it all, Robin?
Well, the good news is...
You didn't even tick it.
No, I didn't.
I didn't tick it. And a part of the reason is I have, and I cover the industry, I have no idea what it means, how it runs, where the money goes, and the general public cannot understand how paying a carbon offset fee actually reduces any carbon in the air.
I completely agree.
Right, shall we go and have
So I think relying on offsets alone is not sufficient. What we have to do is to talk more about some of the technology changes that are going on. I think we...
No, but just stay with this for a minute. My point is not about who did it or not. My point is that this is a scheme that the industry has, that is consumer-facing, that nobody knows how it operates.
I fully agree, and that's why we need to communicate more with maybe words that could be understood by customers, more than describing technical solutions, but they need to understand more. And today we don't communicate enough with the right messages and not enough together. So IATA will be contributing to that in the next future. It was well discussed during our board.
Yes.
And the good news is, if you fly JetBlue, on Monday we're announcing a whole month of us paying the carbon offsets for everybody and educating people in it. So that's, again, something that we're doing as an airline. We can all do more of that. I didn't just make that up. It was actually...
that would have been a remarkable policy move.
Yeah. But Sebastian, it's true, right? Yeah. So, but I mean, we do need to educate people, but it's not enough. You know, we can't just hang our hat on carbon offsets. We can't. I mean, if you look at other users of carbon fuels, the story is around the technology. The story is around, you know, look at what's happening in cars and the move to electric cars. You know, there are other technological innovations. There's sustainable fuels. These are the things we have to convince people that we're serious about this, and we have to convince people that we can meet our commitments that we've made.
How do you do that?
I was alluding to it being an industry solution, industry challenge. And if you look around and see where the carbons are burned, a lot of time, the burning of carbon are quite unnecessary. For example, if you have a holding pattern for the plane while you have a congested airport, that's where it's totally wasted. So there are a lot of things we can do, and some of them very tangible, and we should be very focused on how to get those efficiency done.
It's the right thing to do, Carsten, but it is also going to turn into the politically dangerous thing not to do, as the general public start demanding this more and more. We saw this with Emma Thompson in her recent comments. We've seen it time and again with particularly millennials saying the airline industry are polluters.
Well, again, I think the fact-based answer, we all know this in this room, the 2.5% of global CO2, blah, blah, blah. In my view, has been proven that message is not going through.
Exactly.
And the public, as a journalist like you knows, doesn't only react to facts. It's a storytelling. It's a fact that you see an airplane in the sky. It has this white tail. There must be something wrong. So I think we need to get away from just fact-based messaging, as much as we as engineers like myself like that. And we need to go back to a little bit more populistic approach about what the aviation industry also does for good. I mean, we are emitting 2.5% CO2, but the world gets a lot from that. I think it's part of that discussion. And long term, it's about different kinds of fuel. I mean, that is for sure, my view for sure, at least for long range, there's no new tech in sight. So I think in the end, it's going to be about pushing the oil companies, pushing governments, even regulators, to do more on power to fuel, which I personally think has huge potential, because there's also all this surplus energy coming in the future with solar and wind energy. So there's huge potential for that. We are actually doing quite a few things on that in Lufthansa, also investing into research on this. That might be a midterm improvement, not a solution. And again, not going public about the advantages of aviation will always put us leaning backwards. And that is not healthy for all the good things the industry does.
Yeah, the solutions are been identified, have been quantified. It's a number of initiatives, being, you know, the hybrid or full electric engine for maybe short haul, being the sustainable fuel, being the air traffic control. We know that the solution exists. We know how much time and how much it will reduce, but it's about making sure that we convince the opinion that we are serious about it, we work on it, and we can communicate with words that will impact them, not more like, I'm an engineer too, so, and the fact-based doesn't work.
What's the danger if you don't? What is the risk if you don't win this argument?
We have to, because, and we
Well, hang on.
we're determined to. There is no if we don't win this argument, because we are recognizing that there is deficiency, firstly, in the way we communicate, and secondly, perhaps in how we can coordinate it as an industry. As what we have been saying, it's not a one solution. It's not a one, there's no silver bullet to this problem. It requires every one of us in the chain to actually work towards the reduction of carbon. Alternative fuel is certainly one example. I mean, for us, for example, in SIA, while we don't have an offset scheme for the ticket, we actually work and invest in reforestation in Indonesia. That actually in an area that is bigger than the size of Singapore. So these are different things. There is no one solution. We got to all explore what are the things we can do together to address this problem.
It's a good opportunity to see if anybody wishes to join in on this question of either competitive issues or the question of the environment. Now, bearing in mind we have an entire room of CEOs and journalists, one would have thought that there might be one question from somebody somewhere. Come to you. Yes, we'll come to you in a second, Peter, because you're going to neatly lead us into the next area of our discussion. Yes, sir, over here. Yeah, push the button.
Any voice? There we go. Joe Leader, the CEO of Apex. In terms of fighting back with facts, why is the industry, you know, it seems it's always flying shame that's catching on. Why are we being defensive? When I think as an industry, we should be proud of what we're doing. We should be demanding recycling infrastructure. We should be demanding things that help our airlines be better stewards of environments. Why are we being so defensive, and what could we do differently?
Carsten.
Well, I couldn't agree more. That's the point I made. All these AGMs I've been to, sometimes we complain about airports, then we complain about ATC, then we complain about environmental potential additional cost. We need to talk more about what this industry does and what this world would be like if we wouldn't connect continents. And not just for the rich anymore, but for big parts of society. So it starts right here, in my view, not only to complain. And I do that wherever I appear in public, and I try to make my people proud of working in an airline. And funny enough, it works. Finding young people to be recruited, it's easy for an airline, even though we have full employment in my home markets, because working for an airline has a purpose, makes the world a better place, smaller place. Young, talented people love to work for airlines. Much different for the financial industry, for example. So, I mean, we are not as much in defense as we sometimes make it sound here when Richard Quest interviews us.
I thought eventually I'd get the blame.
And I must say, yesterday, being Carsten or Alexandre, they expressed the fact that we should invest more time and a bigger budget to make sure this communication will be created and deployed. So it's a top priority.
Peter.
It's a change of topic. If you want to stay on the environment.
No, I'm happy to go where you wish.
All right, a totally different direction then. We in today's daily, we put out the thesis that the recent profitability of the airline industry, which in fact is largely based on US domestic, or majority based on US domestic profits, is really just a temporary aberration from the long-term trend that international aviation can never be sustainable. And that's because of the essentially protectionist rules of ownership and control, which will not allow cross-border mergers, which happen in every other global industry. I wonder if the panel, and I don't suspect for a moment that the ownership rules are going to change in the near future, but given that rather bleak outlook, I just wonder if the panel has any thoughts on whether the international industry genuinely is possibly going to be sustainable in the long run.
This issue of sustainability, thank you. You all made major changes as a result of the last downturn. You all reformed and changed and merged and altered and tightened up. Did you all do enough, starting with SIA? Have you reached the position of sustainable profitability?
I mentioned that there were structural changes in my part of the world, particularly with such high penetration of LCCs. It's actually the highest in the world in terms of a region. And we decided that that was a structural change that we have to address. If you were to separate travel components and vehicles, as in type of airlines, into broad categories, you can find 4 segments, basically. One of them is LCC, and within LCC, it could be LCC just focusing on the regional to medium haul, and also those that are willing to venture long haul. So that's 2. And then we have, of course, full service. Again, it could be regional, it could be long haul. And what we did was, at the beginning of this challenge, have 1 vehicle in each of those segments. So we have Silk Air, which take care of our regional medium haul, up to medium haul operation for the full service type of model. And then we have, of course, SIA operating the medium to long haul. And then in the LCC market, we have Tiger, which operated regional using narrow body, and we have Scoot that operated the longer haul operation with wide body. So what we did then, that was the first part, which is having a vehicle that could occupy each of those segments so that it could address all the different segments of the travel market. Then what we did was, in order for us to be even more efficient in feeding traffic, so we merged Tiger and Scoot into 1 airline. So Scoot's regional traffic is now able to fit into, or rather Tiger's former regional traffic is now able to fit seamlessly into Scoot because it's just 1 company. And we are in the process of merging or integrating Silk Air into SIA too. So broadly speaking, we'll then have 2 separate airlines, 1 taking care of all the budget travel requirement needs, and the other one addressing the full service needs. in which case we are now very efficient, and we can actually be very nimble in moving routes between the two different models when the need comes. There are places where we used to operate with a full service, such as Berlin, such as Athens, which is really not a right model to actually operate. We are now operating those flights or those destinations with Scoot on a long-haul basis. Similarly, there are places where we couldn't operate in the medium long haul using an LCC model. Surprisingly, it may be surprising to you, like for example, Bangalore, actually the LCC doesn't perform as well as a full service. They actually move from the LCC operations to a full service one. So this gives us a lot of flexibility and nimbleness in adapting to the market.
Right. I saw you writing and nodding, Carsten. Do you believe the industry and yourselves, you've reached long-term sustainable growth?
Well, I was nodding because we're doing exactly the same thing. We have 600 aircraft in the premium segment, full service, and we got 200 aircraft in the second production line, Eurowings. So I'm always happy when Singapore does the same thing as we do, then we know we are right.
And we are partners too, you know.
I was going to say, I won't ask who did it first.
No, I think we will still be a volatile industry, and I was making the joke about leasing companies. Unfortunately, we're still an industry where the entry hurdle is artificially low. So I think there will be volatility, but I think beyond, in those limits, we have reached sustainable business models, yes.
Well, we're not smart enough to have all those different models, so we just have one.
But you're still young.
Yeah, we're still young. But look,
But hang on.
I haven't answered.
No, you're getting there.
Yeah.
You're not smart enough to have that, you just have one, but you don't really just have one, because you're about to go across the Atlantic. And the moment you go across the Atlantic...
Nice deflection. Nice deflection.
I know.
Yeah.
You didn't even see it coming, did you?
I didn't think you were going to ask.
You're about to go across the Atlantic. Why on earth do you want to jump into that brutal nest of... Go on. You were ready for the... He didn't think I was going to ask, but he just so happens to have a piece of paper. He's about to come out with something. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so question for you, Richard. If you want to fly Boston, London tomorrow in business class and return in a week, what was the best available fare when I looked yesterday?
Well, Boston, I don't know, but I could give you New York. New York, outbound, short notice, inbound, anywhere between 5,500 to 7,500 round trip.
Well, you must be getting special deals, because I saw 8,000, and I saw Boston to London at 12,000. $12,000.
Yeah, but was that on a carrier that actually runs the route, or was it on a code share with a few?
No, it was a carrier that runs the route. I'm not saying who it is, but that's the point.
So you just want to get your nose in that trough?
We want to bring low fares. We want to bring low fares. When we started with Mint across the country in the US, since we started that, premium fares have halved. And so, what the secret of our success and how we've built a sustainably profitable airline is based on three things: keep our cost structure low, offer our customers a better product, and have a great culture. And we are unique, I believe, in the US in our ability to have that low cost structure, but also deliver our customers a better product. And we see an opportunity in premium across the Atlantic, the same opportunity we saw to LA. In fact, the fares are a lot higher than they were from JFK to LAX, and the flight's only an hour longer.
I don't want to give Jeffrey a heart attack by asking where you're going to price, because he would leap out of his seat like a thing on an electric shock. But, Carsten, when you hear this...
One should fly via Frankfurt.
Yeah.
You want to fly to London, you should go via Frankfurt. Better service
these
and
were
lower
direct
prices.
fares.
Yeah, all right. But what happens...
Before JetBlue comes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, but what happens when he comes?
Well, fortunately, his airplanes only reach until London, so he can.
Yeah, we can't get to Frankfurt yet.
No, we are quite safe. You won't fly non-stop to Singapore, right?
Sorry?
You will not be flying non-stop to Singapore.
No. It's a secret. I'm not saying anything else. We're still working out what London airport we fly to. How can we think further than that?
Which airport should he fly into?
Oh, good question.
Although, it's the 321 LR won't get in there. All those in favour of Gatwick, put your hand up.
Oh, no.
All those in favour of Stansted, put your hand up.
There's one there.
One.
Bjorn, put your hand down. All those in favour of Heathrow, put your hand up.
Luton, you've got Luton.
The one person who'd like to fly to Luton. How much of a... we'll come back to... we're getting...
That wasn't much help. There wasn't many hands going up.
But how much of a debate is that within JetBlue, which airport to go to? Assuming all things being equal, assuming you can get the slots, all things being equal, how much of it is a debate of which airport?
Well, I mean, we're working all the angles, as you'd expect us to. Again, we're flying a 321 LR. We're not flying 6 wide bodies a day. So, you know, I think we have a lot more flexibility. Look, anyone can make money on the transatlantic in the summer. If you can't, then it's, you know, you're doing something wrong. The challenge has been the winter and flying these big wide bodies with a lot of frequency when there's very little demand down the back of the airplane. And, you know, we're not going to have that with the 321 LR. So I think we can do things and fly to airports and make it work that others haven't been able to do.
We watch and wait. Finally, I want to come to this idea of putting the customer first. You all talk about, I was talking to one gentleman here who said, when I asked him what you should talk, he says, how realistic is it to put the customer first? How far are you? Let's start with Singapore. How far are you with the concept of having the data that you're able to use in a meaningful way? This airline, I've heard you say this, Mr. Goh, this industry collects more data about its consumers than anybody else. But what the hell do you do with it?
Richard, you travel a fair bit on all the airlines, including Singapore Airlines. Maybe you should answer that question too. As to how personalized do you think the customers could actually be on traveling with an airline?
At the moment, it's 0.
0, really?
At the moment, it's just, well...
Then you got to travel more on Singapore
Sorry?
Airlines. But I think...
Besides being recognized by your name and all of that. But to answer you...
No, I think we pay a lot of attention to these aspects. To us, the next important aspects of customer service is really about personalization, which is to know the customers much better and to tailor your service so that it is what the customer prefers.
What does that mean?
So, for example, I mean, let me just say that firstly, you will need to be able to translate either observations or preferences that a customer tell you into a system that would allow prompt to whoever is delivering the service. So in this case, for example, if you're on board a plane and you are frequent travelers with us, we ought to know what kind of drinks you like, for example. What kind of food do you like? What kind of reading materials would you like? And therefore, we can then tailor it accordingly.
Is that realistic, Carsten?
Well, it's happening also in our airline that we do those things, but in the end, the comfort, the passenger experience is still driven by the real thing. What are the seats like? How friendly are the flight attendants? How reliable are it? So the good thing about this industry is...
How important is product?
Oh,
It depends.
fortunately for Singapore and us, in all modesty, it's hugely important. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here because we are not known for fighting the world by lowest cost. We are fighting the global competition by best product. Premium is huge. And by establishing a second product line for us, we were able to lift Swiss and Lufthansa even further up. And it has worked out very well for us.
I think product innovation is absolutely important for us.
This is not a commodity industry for everybody.
So definition of product is different, I think, depending on which kind of product you buy and what expectation you have on the product. And it's a match between, you know, price, expectation, and product.
But at the back, I realize it's probably quite some time since any of you went fully at the back. Now you're going to correct me and tell me that
Oh, yeah,
last week you
I
went...
fly in the back all the time. I live in the back.
And it's not true. I flew to New York last year on economy class from Singapore.
It's
Yeah,
easy on
I'm not sure I
Flybe,
do
we
that.
have one class, so I always fly in the back.
At the back, what developments can there be to make that journey more pleasurable, or at least more pleasant? Does product matter at the back, or is price the only thing that's important?
I actually think you have to do both. I think for us to be effective in the US, where we are a quarter of the size, a third of the size of the legacy airlines, we know we have to be different. And so, you know, we offer the most legroom. We offer the free live TV, the free Wi-Fi. And the most important thing of all is great crew members who come to work and are nice to people. You can put all the work into clever technology that you can, but if you get on that airplane and there's no one nice that greets you and makes you feel at home, it's not going to count for anything. And so it's critical but I don't think you have to choose. You have to deliver a great product, and you have to have a cost structure and be efficient that allows you to keep your fares low.
Pretty hard task, isn't it?
Well, I probably think we spend as much time on our positioning as an airline product, an airline brand, as we spend our time as positioning ourselves as an employer brand. Because I fully agree with that. Again, we have full employment back home in our home markets, so being a fascinating employer, we focus on a lot, and that in the end, of course, pays off by having a better product. Don't do that for the sake of itself. I fully agree.
Final question for anybody in the room. Last call. So I freely admit that I plagiarized this last one. Carsten will know where it's coming from. I plagiarized it from an A4E earlier this year.
What? You plagiarized it from what?
I plagiarized it. I'm using a question. Would you just sit quietly, please? I'll ask the questions, you answer them. We'll all get on much better. Christine, which of these three airlines would you like to run, and why?
And she's available.
Assuming I'm going to give you, if you could run one of them, which one would it be?
I think I have a little preference for JetBlue.
JetBlue?
That's very nice. Here.
No, the reason, I've been living in New York for a while, and I think that I was a customer. And
Robin, which of the other airlines here would you like to run?
Well, I'm going to take Flybe out.
You can run Virgin.
Sorry? 19 years of British Airways, not going to happen. A very hard choice, but I think, Lufthansa, because I think they have one of every airplane, or pretty much one of every airplane at least.
More than one.
Noah's Ark, as I heard it once described.
And I'd like to try some different airplanes, because we only have two types.
So, Mr. Go, which one would you like?
I would really like to try an airline in a market where I won't be flying out of the country a very first instance of lifting from the airport. So I would love to try Frankfurt or in case of Robin in US, I would love to have an airline that gives me tremendous potential in domestic market. So either one of them.
Oh, a true diplomat.
But Flybe is the domestic airline too.
Ah, yes.
Because Robin ruled you out.
Carsten.
I would take Flybe. I would love to be the first male CEO after a female CEO.
Oh.
Now, I probably would take Singapore because I think you are still maintaining that flying is something special. And that I think we all should be more proud about what we do. I think that is something we should, as an industry, carry on more.
Sorry. What were you saying, Chief? You want to travel on Qatar Airways?
I'd rather travel Qatar Airways than run it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.